The dog didn't move when they laughed at him. That was the part nobody talked about afterward. Not the part where the handlers in their pressed shirts and custom boots stood in a circle and threw crumpled bills at the old man's feet. Not the part where one of them said, "Pick it up, old-timer. That's more than you'll make this week." But the part where the dog, 110 pounds of trained aggression that had broken 3 men's wrists in the past 18 months, simply turned his head toward the old man and went still. The laughter stopped about 2 seconds after that. Nobody wanted to explain why. His name was Obinna. He was 53 years old, and he had been standing outside the gates of the Ridgeline Canine Sports Facility in Langley, British Columbia, for 40 minutes before anyone acknowledged him. He had a canvas bag over one shoulder, a paper cup of Tim Hortons coffee that had gone cold, and a letter of recommendation from a veterinary behaviorist in Nairobi, whose name none of the staff recognized because none of them had looked it up. He was not dressed like someone who belonged there. That was the first thing Harlan Voss decided, and Harlan Voss was the kind of man who made decisions like that quickly and considered the matter settled. Harlan ran the facility's elite competition division, the dogs that competed at national and international levels, the dogs whose prize records were laminated and framed in the reception hallway. He had been in this industry for 22 years. He could read a room, a dog, a situation. He had read Obinna in about 4 seconds flat. What he saw, an older black man in a worn jacket, work boots with dried mud on the left heel, a canvas bag that looked like it had been carried across several countries because it had been. Quiet eyes, no urgency, no performance of confidence which Harlan had learned to distrust in handlers anyway. The ones who walked in performing confidence were usually covering for something. What he decided, wrong address, wrong day, probably wrong facility entirely. "Deliveries are around back," he said, and kept walking. Obinna looked at the receptionist behind the glass, a young woman named Jessie who had been watching this and now found something important to do with her keyboard. "I have an appointment," Obinna said. 9 o'clock, with a Mr. Marcus Duff. Marcus Duff was the facility's general manager, a practical man who had placed a hiring ad 4 weeks ago because their lead behavioral consultant had quit after the situation with the dog they called Ghost. Harlan had not been consulted on the ad, which was a detail he had not forgiven. Jessie found the appointment in the system. She told Obinna she would let Marcus know he was here. Harlan stood by the glass partition that overlooked the main training floor, watching. Ghost was a Belgian Malinois, 3 years old, 78 pounds. He had been donated to the facility by a collapsed police canine program in Alberta. Budget cuts, the official story went, though people who knew the program knew the fuller version, which was that Ghost had failed his final certification because he could not reliably de-escalate, which in practical terms meant that he had sent 2 evaluation officers to the hospital. Not badly, but enough. He was extraordinary. That was the maddening part. His tracking scores were in the top 2 percentile of any dog the facility had ever assessed. His drive was exceptional, his intelligence, and people argued about whether that word applied to dogs, but the people who argued had usually not spent time with Ghost. His intelligence was the kind that watched you, filed information, made calculations. He remembered things. He noticed patterns. He knew, for instance, when someone was afraid of him before they showed any visible sign of it, and he responded to that fear in ways that were not reassuring. 3 consultants had tried to work with him in 4 months. The first lasted 8 sessions before recommending euthanasia. The second lasted 3. The third, the one who had quit, had lasted 6 weeks, which was long enough to make everyone think they were getting somewhere, before Ghost pinned him against a kennel door and held him there for 90 seconds without biting, which somehow worse than biting. The vet had cleared him physically. There was nothing wrong with him medically. He simply did not accept authority from people he had not decided to accept it from, and in 11 months at the facility, he had not decided to accept it from anyone. Harlan thought the vet should be overruled. He had put this in writing twice. Marcus Duff thought they hadn't found the right person yet. Obinna sat across from Marcus in the glass-walled office that looked out onto the reception area. He had placed his canvas bag on the floor beside his chair and folded his hands on the table. He did not have a portfolio or a presentation. He had the letter from Nairobi, 2 additional references printed on plain paper, and a handwritten log. The kind of log, Marcus noticed, where the handwriting changed density depending on what was being recorded, pressing harder on some entries, lighter on others, as though the observations themselves had different weights. Marcus asked him about his background. Obinna had spent 19 years working with working dogs in Kenya, South Africa, and twice in northern Nigeria. Protection animals, search and rescue dogs, 1 extraordinary seasoned training assistance animals for a clinic outside Lagos that couldn't afford imported specialists. He had come to Canada 3 years ago when his daughter moved to Vancouver. He had been working contract consultations, small jobs, word of mouth. He had heard about this facility from a vet tech in Abbotsford who had heard about Ghost. "You heard about a difficult dog and came looking," Marcus said. "I heard about a dog people had given up on," Obinna said. "That's a different thing." Marcus looked at the handwritten log again. "Our last 3 consultants had formal certifications, IAABC, CCPDT. Credential." "I know," Obinna said. He did not elaborate. "The dog has injured people. I read the incident reports." He had asked for them specifically when he made the appointment. Jesse had forwarded them without checking with anyone. He didn't injure them the way an aggressive dog injures. He stopped them. "There's a distinction." Marcus leaned back. Through the glass, he could see Harlan Voss standing at the partition to the main floor, not looking at them but very clearly aware of this conversation. "The owner of this facility," Marcus said carefully, "has suggested we consider a different path for this dog." Obinna understood what that meant. "When do I start?" he said. The answer, after Marcus made 2 phone calls and sent 1 carefully worded email to the facility owner, was Monday. Harlan did not speak to Obinna directly on the first day. He stood near the entrance to the east wing when Jesse was showing Obinna around, and he made comments, not to Obinna, to the air nearby, in the way that people do when they want to be heard but want deniability about having spoken. The last had 20 years of experience. Didn't matter. Some dogs just can't be reached. That's biology, not a training problem. Interesting, bringing in someone without credentials right when we've got an insurance review pending. Obinna walked past him each time without acknowledgement, not with the stiffness of someone suppressing a response, with the genuine absence of someone for whom the commentary registered as neither relevant nor interesting. This made Harlan angrier than an argument would have. 2 of the junior handlers, Brett and a young man named Cody, who had been there less than a year, followed Harlan's lead. By the end of the first week, they had developed a small repertoire, quiet comments when Obinna was within earshot, exaggerated performances of going out of their way to avoid being in the same corridor. Nothing that could be written up, everything that could be felt. On Friday afternoon, one of them, Cody, who was 24 and not yet wise enough to know the difference between belonging to a group and being used by one, dropped his lunch in the break room in a way that splattered coffee across the floor, then gestured at Obinna and said, "Your mess," to the general space, grinning at Brett across the table. Obinna looked at the coffee on the floor. He looked at Cody. Then he picked up the paper towels from the counter and cleaned it up without speaking. Cody's grin faded before he was done. Brett laughed, but it was the laugh of someone who needed to fill silence. Jessie, who had been eating lunch in the corner and had seen everything, finished her sandwich and said nothing and went back to her desk. But she sat there afterward thinking about what she had done, which was not what Cody thought he had done. And she kept thinking about it all weekend. Obinna's approach with Ghost was not what anyone expected. He did not approach Ghost. For the first 4 days, he simply existed in proximity. He sat outside the run with a clipboard and a pen and wrote in the same handwritten log. And he did not look at Ghost directly for longer than a few seconds at a time. And he did not speak to Ghost except once. On the second day, very quietly, in Igbo, one sentence that lasted about 5 seconds and then he went back to writing. Ghost watched him. By the third day, Ghost had stopped pacing. This was noted by the kennel staff and by Marcus, who mentioned it to Harlan, who said it was probably coincidence. On the fifth day, Obinna brought Ghost's meals instead of the kennel assistant. He pushed the bowl through the slot, sat down on the bench across from the run, and read from a paperback novel. He did not watch Ghost eat. He did not comment on it afterward. On the eighth day, he opened the door to the run and stepped inside with a lead in his hand, not attached to anything, just held loosely at his side, and sat cross-legged on the ground, about 4 meters from Ghost. The handler who had been assigned to observe this pressed himself back against the far wall. Ghost walked to within 2 meters of Obinna and stopped. They stayed like that for 40 minutes. When Obinna left, Ghost did not pace. Harlan escalated his concern to the facility owner, a man named Terrence Booth, who had made his money in commercial real estate and bought the facility as a passion project and trusted Harlan's judgment on operational matters. Because Harlan spoke with the confidence of someone who was always right, which is different from actually being right, but is consistently harder to argue with. Harlan framed it as a liability issue, the insurance review, the lack of formal credentials, the unorthodox methods. He's just sitting there, Terrence, just sitting on the ground with this animal that put a man in the hospital, and the general risk to the facility's reputation if something went wrong. Terrence Booth asked what Marcus thought. Harlan said Marcus was being patient. Terrence said he'd come by to see for himself on the weekend. On a Thursday afternoon in the third week, Obinna was walking Ghost on a lead through the east compound. The first time Ghost had been walked by anyone outside the kennel staff in months, when Harlan and 2 of the competition handlers came through the gate from the training floor. Harlan stopped. Ghost stopped. What happened next lasted about 12 seconds. Harlan moved to go around them on the path, then changed direction, which brought him within 2 meters of Ghost, and Ghost shifted his weight in a way that every experienced person in that space understood immediately. Harlan stepped back fast. One of the other handlers grabbed his arm instinctively, and then Obinna said something. One word quietly in a tone that wasn't a command so much as a reminder. Ghost looked up at him. Then he sat, just like that, 78 pounds of controlled tension, sitting on a gravel path in the afternoon light, looking at this old man in the worn jacket as though waiting for the next sentence. Harlan walked away quickly and did not look back. One of the other handlers, a woman named Petra, who had been at the facility for 7 years and had her own opinions about Harlan that she had never found the right moment to express, stood watching until they rounded the corner. She mentioned it to Marcus the next morning. She wasn't sure why she felt it was important. She just felt it was. The thing about Terrence Booth was that he was not a cruel man. This distinction matters because what happened next is sometimes told as a story about a villain, and Terrence was not that. He was a man who trusted the wrong person's framing for a long time, which is a different failure and a more common one. He came to the facility on a Saturday morning when Obinna was not there. He came on a Saturday because Harlan suggested Saturday, and Harlan suggested Saturday because Obinna typically came in Monday through Friday. Terrence walked the facility with Harlan, who showed him the insurance documents, the incident reports, the article from a national canine sports magazine that had referenced the facility's challenges with a high-risk animal, which Harlan had flagged and printed and paper-clipped to the front of the folder. He did not show Terrence the handler's note from the previous week, where Petra had documented Ghost walking calmly on lead for the first time in 8 months. That note had been filed in the wrong subfolder. It is possible this was an accident. Terrence looked at the folder and listened to Harlan for 40 minutes, and then said he thought perhaps they should consider wrapping up the behavioral consultation at the end of the month, if there wasn't clear documented progress. Marcus told Obinna on Monday morning, straight out, the way Marcus did things. Obinna listened. He was holding a mug of coffee, his own, brought from home in a thermos because the facility's coffee machine produced something he found undrinkable, and he had mentioned this once, and not again. He turned the mug in his hands. "How much time?" he said. "3 weeks. Maybe 4 if I push it." What does he want to see? Ghost on a lead, responding to commands consistently. No incidents. Marcus paused. Honestly, he wants to walk out of here feeling like the decision is defensible. He's not looking to be right. He just wants cover. Obinna nodded slowly. "And Harlan? Harlan wants what Harlan always wants," Marcus said. "To have been right the whole time." Obinna looked out the window at the east compound. "Is there a competition coming up?" Marcus looked at him. "The Pacific Regional, end of September, and Ghost's tracking scores, before all of this, top of the assessments. Highest raw scores we'd recorded in 6 years." Marcus set down his pen. "You're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Obinna said. He picked up his thermos and his handwritten log. "I'm going to go sit with the dog." The incident happened in the 5th week, though incident is not quite the right word for it. Cody had been assigned to the East Wing that morning. Routine kennel rounds, nothing more. And he came around the corner of the run corridor at the wrong moment, moving fast, cutting the corner short in the way young men do when they think no one important is watching. He nearly walked into Obinna, who was coming the other way with Ghost off lead, which nobody had authorized and which Obinna had simply done because Ghost was ready for it and the corridor was empty. Or had been empty. Cody stumbled backward. Ghost's head snapped in his direction. There was a noise from the back of Ghost's throat, not a bark, not a growl, something older and more direct than either. And Cody hit the wall and stood there, flat against it, hands up, face gone completely white. Ghost was 12 inches from him. Obinna said the name. Just that, Ghost. And Ghost turned and walked to Obinna's left side and sat, and looked up and waited. The corridor was silent. Cody slid down the wall slightly and then caught himself, straightening. His hands were still raised. He was breathing in short pulls. Obinna looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, not with any of the things Cody might have expected, just looking. The way a person looks when they have something to say and are deciding whether it's the right time. "He's not dangerous," Obinna said. "He's specific. There's a difference." Cody did not say anything. "He can tell," Obinna said quietly, "when someone means something and when they don't. He's been in enough rooms with people who don't mean what they're saying that he stopped extending the courtesy of pretending." He looked down at Ghost. "Most animals are like that. We train it out of them because it's inconvenient." He walked past Cody down the corridor, Ghost matching his stride, and turned the corner, and was gone. Cody stood against the wall for another 30 seconds. Then he went to find Jessie, because she was the person at this facility he'd been most unkind to in small ways over the past year, and something about the last 3 minutes had made that feel urgent to address. It was not a transformation, it was a start, which is all any of them ever are. The Pacific Regional Assessment runs over 2 days, and on the first morning, when the judges arrived and the competing handlers walked their dogs through registration, one of the judges, a woman named Dr. Vivian Okafor, who had been adjudicating national canine sports competitions for 14 years and was not easily impressed, stopped at Ghost registration card and asked which handler. Marcus said it was Obinna Chukwu. She asked him to spell it. She wrote it in her notes. "I know that name," she said, "from a paper, a behavior paper years ago. Animal cognition and trust sequencing." "He didn't mention that," Marcus said. "No," she said, and looked at the score history on the card. "He wouldn't, would he?" There are moments in any competition where something shifts, where the thing being assessed stops being performance and becomes something else, and everyone watching feels it, even if no one has words for it immediately. The tracking sequence is the third event of the morning. Ghost moves through it with the kind of focus that makes experienced people stop talking. The lead is loose in Obinna's hand, not because Ghost is constrained, but because he has chosen to stay within the boundary of it, which is not a small distinction. The judge with the stopwatch clicks off the time, and then looks up from her clipboard and watches instead of writing, which is also not a small thing. Harlan Voss is standing at the viewing rail with Terrence Booth, who has come down for the day, Harlan is explaining things, narrating the events with the authority of someone who has always known how this would go, though the direction of his narrative keeps requiring small adjustments as the morning continues. Terrence watches Ghost move through the course. He watches Obinna, who is barely moving, barely speaking, whose presence on the field is less direction than agreement. "How long has he been doing this?" Terrence asks. Harlan starts to answer. "With dogs," Terrence says. "How long has he been doing this with dogs?" Harlan is quiet for a moment. "A long time," Terrence says, and it is not a question. The obedience trials are the afternoon session, and by then word has moved through the facility the way word does, quietly, between people who have seen something they want to pass on. Petra tells two of the younger staff. Jesse, who has taken a late lunch to watch the afternoon session, stands at the back of the viewing area and does not check her phone once in 40 minutes, which is unusual for her. Ghost completes the routine without a single break. The commands come from Obinna in the same tone he uses for everything. Quiet, matter of fact, carrying no anxiety in them, which is the thing that most handlers cannot achieve and most dogs can detect immediately. Ghost moves through each station like the problem of trust has simply been resolved, which, from Ghost's perspective, it has been. When they come off the field, one of the junior handlers, who has been watching from the gate, reaches out instinctively toward Ghost. Not grabbing, just a reflex, the way people reach toward dogs without thinking, and stops himself before he makes contact. Because everyone who has spent time around Ghost has learned to stop themselves. Ghost turns and looks at the outstretched hand, sniffs it, steps forward. The handler goes absolutely still. Ghost presses the side of his head against the open palm and stands there. In 2 years at this facility, nothing like this has happened. Terrence Booth finds Obinna afterward in the East Compound, where Obinna has taken Ghost for a walk, off-lead, in the long grass beside the fence that nobody uses because it's out of the way and slightly uneven and doesn't serve any practical purpose. Ghost is trotting ahead with his nose down, doing something that looks less like work and more like pleasure, which is also not something anyone has seen from him. Terrence introduces himself. He is a tall man, mid-60s, the kind of person who has been told he is formidable for so long that he sometimes forgets to turn it off. He extends his hand. Obinna shakes it. Ghost comes trotting back, looks at Terrence with the assessing look, and then goes back to the grass. "I owe you an apology," Terrence says. He says it directly, which costs him something, which is how apologies should work. "I was given a certain picture of the situation here, and I didn't look at anything outside that picture. That's on me." Obinna says nothing immediately. He watches Ghost move through the grass. "The dog was given up on twice before I got here. Once by the program that trained him, and once by people in this building. He's not an easy animal." He pauses. But he was never the problem. He was just the answer to a question nobody wanted to ask. Terrence asks him what question, whether the people around him deserved his trust. Obinna glances at him briefly, then back at Ghost. He's been asking that from the beginning. Most dogs stop asking if you wait long enough. He didn't. Terrence is quiet for a moment. Ghost has stopped in the grass and is looking back at them, at Obinna specifically, with an expression that Terrence can't quite name, which he suspects is because he doesn't have the right vocabulary yet. "I'd like to talk about your contract," Terrence says. Harlan Voss submitted his resignation 11 days later, which surprised people in the way that things surprise people who have been watching something, come for a long time but did not name it out loud. He sent a brief email to Terrence, citing personal reasons, and then he sent a longer email to his industry contacts that framed things differently, and neither email mentioned the Pacific Regional, or the morning, in the corridor, or Obinna Chukwu by name, and most people who received the second email read it with the understanding that there is a version of events, and then there is what actually happened. And with enough time, the second one usually finds its way into the light. Cody stayed. He requested, in a conversation with Marcus that lasted 7 minutes, and was more honest than most conversations Cody had managed up to that point in his life, to be reassigned to the East Wing. Marcus told him to ask Obinna directly. So he did, standing in the corridor outside the runs, not quite making eye contact, saying he knew he hadn't been, that he had been, that there were things he wished he'd. Obinna let him finish. Then he said, Monday morning, 6:30. We start with the feeding rounds. Caudy said, thank you, and Obinna nodded and went back to his log. And Ghost watched all of this from behind the gate with the expression that everyone had now stopped trying to read as dangerous and had started to read as simply attentive, which is what it had always been. Jessie told this story to her sister in Burnaby one Sunday afternoon over the phone, and her sister asked what the old man was like, and Jessie thought about it for longer than usual questions take her to answer. He never once explained himself, she said finally. He never told them what he was doing or defended it, or tried to make them understand. He just kept going. She paused. I think that bothered people more than anything else. They couldn't find the edge to push on. Her sister asked if the dog was still there. Yeah, Jessie said. They're using him in the youth training program now. Obinna says he's good with kids who've had rough starts. Says they recognize something in each other. She laughed a little and then stopped because it was also not funny. I don't know how you look at something like that, she said, and decide it's the thing that needs to be fixed. Outside the facility, in the long grass by the fence that served no practical purpose, a dog that everyone had decided was broken ran with his nose to the ground in the cool morning air, reading the world the only way he knew how, carefully, completely, one slow breath at a time.